We're going to dive into quantum physics now.
From psychology to quantum physics.
Yep. But as a metaphor, I know a little bit about the implications. I have no idea about the maths of this, but I know about the implications that quantum physics gives us. It's really, really interesting to frame these type of things using that language, especially when we're talking about hidden states, the psychological landscape that we don't see on the surface level in groups, in relationships. And there is potential and there is observation. We didn't talk about it too much, but when these underlying things come to the surface and you talk about them, it's almost like there's a shift in the group dynamics or in a relationship dynamic. Often difficult conversations are what kind of shifts the atmosphere. It's an interesting one. So one of the most striking images is quantum entanglement. So it's this idea that when two particles, they're no longer entirely separate in the way that we might expect. And they don't even have to have the same locality. It's very strange. They could be on the other side of the world and still have an effect on each other. So I'm going to carefully use that as a metaphor, because we do become entangled with each other. And in relation, whatever relationship we've got, there is a certain sense, a certain level of entanglement that is just happening. It's just part of what happens when you connect with another person. Remember, this is uncovering a sacred design, I think, that God has established in the universe for us to take advantage of and to mature into our way of experiencing.
So people are not just sealed off individuals sitting in the same room?
No, on a quantum level, we are not sealed containers. And especially in a tight community, an unspoken struggle can become part of the communal atmosphere. And as we said before, it shapes the shared field, remembering our psychological terms there. And then other people respond to it, even without realizing what they're responding to. Yeah.
So there's a kind of rational counter-movement in that, even though it may be subconscious.
Yeah, there's a rationality to this level of awareness, which is fascinating, actually. It's absolutely fascinating if we started talking off onto that.
Yeah, goodness me.
So in quantum mechanics, before something is observed, this is through the Double-Slit experiment. If you've looked into that, just look into that, Google it. So before something is observed, this is a quantum kind of reality that was one of the most difficult things for the early discoverers of quantum mechanics. Is like after observation it becomes a particle, and it's like, hang on a minute, observation, that's so matter is responding to our conscious observation of it, is matter conscious, and that actually caused a couple of people to lose their minds. The first time I was introduced to quantum ideas back in the days when Chuck Missler was giving some talks on that. I don't know if you know that guy.
Yeah, Chuck Missler's amazing. He's died now. He was very methodical in the way he explained things really, really clearly. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, anyway, so when I first got that, it took me a few weeks to settle down inside because reality wasn't as I thought it was. And this was before the days of the internet and YouTube, where this stuff is all over the internet now.
Yeah, it's a very different world. It must have been a long time ago.
It was. I think it was like early thousands. Anyway, so let's boil it down to something practical. So before something's observed or measured, it's described in terms of probability. It's not yet resolved into a definite state. We're saying the wave function hasn't collapsed into a definite state. It exists in a sense in a field of possibilities, and in terms of probability, something that's not observed or measured yet is still kind of like a wave. It's not yet resolved into something definite. It still exists in an infinite field of possibilities, and that's basically straight out of what Neville Goddard is talking about. I'm being careful here again, because I'm not saying that emotions are particles, even though on some level they are, but let's not get distracted by that. Psychology is what we experience of that.
So you're saying before something is named, there's this kind of maybe state that it sits in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that maybe, it's exhausting, isn't it?
It is absolutely exhausting, because when something remains unspoken, your mind is like continually running these simulations. I mean, this is all unconscious processes I'm talking about. Maybe sometimes they come into the conscious. It can be exhausting, a bit like having lots of browser windows open or lots of programs running in the background. You need to shut them down at some point. Eventually, with these relational maybes, sometimes, especially if they're strong and persistent, something needs to become concrete in that.
That takes a hell of a lot of energy, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's like, this is the nature of waves, is that they, even if you don't see them, even if the amplitude of it settles down a bit, the wave will, theoretically and probably practically, it's going to spread out and spread out and spread out.
Yeah, that's a great image.
So a wave spreads, it occupies space, it keeps moving, it's not settled. The whole idea of a wave is that it is not settled, it's continually moving. But then something's named. And this is where the idea of the collapse of wave function comes in, because this is where it becomes such a powerful metaphor for what we're talking about here, because in physics, when observation or measurement happens, the range of possibilities collapses into one definite state. So it has to become concrete at some stage in a relational scenario like this, I think. I mean, this is what I'm proposing. Some things, it's okay if it doesn't come to the surface, but some things become exhausting if you don't have a difficult conversation to bring some concreteness to what you're feeling.
Because truth, even if it's painful, is a lighter weight than uncertainty, isn't it?
And that's the paradox. A painful fact can actually feel lighter than an unresolved maybe, because once something is concrete, you can actually relate to it properly. You can put it on the table. You can then build a boundary around it. You can actually start engineering around that, socially, relationally.
So naming it gave form to what had been formless.
Yeah, and I think in there we have echoes of Genesis 1, the whole formless and void aspect of creation. It was almost like a wave that needed to be collapsed of potential that I'm not sure, talking in these terms, would God have been able to hold on to that moment? And we're going to go into Kabbalistically to look at this as well.
Do you want to go into a little bit of the Kabbalistic mind in this? Chesed, Gevurah, those kind of...
Yeah, okay. I think it's really helpful here. So Chesed is a Hebrew word which means kind of loving kindness. That's where we get the idea of the love of God, mercy of God. And it's got the idea of connection. And then the other side of it is Gevurah, which is restraint. It's kind of like the boundaries of the ocean. Gevurah was how creation was manifest through, first of all, dividing light from darkness, giving the endless possibilities boundaries. And the further up you go in creation into the more complicated levels of the mind of God manifesting in creation, you see more and more boundaries, even cell boundaries, even systems always have to have a boundary to them. And sometimes boundaries are the best sort of kindness.
If you think of discipline, the idea of disciplining children, it's ultimate kindness. It's the definitiveness of the boundaries that we put children within is ultimately helpful, is ultimately kind, and it's conducive to their growth.
Exactly, and that's the key. A clear boundary, it's a mature clear boundary based on this wave collapse, based on understanding, based on Gevurah that comes in to surround something that has collapsed into a particle. Clarity actually can be kinder than vagueness, as we're talking about here.
That is very different from living in a half-spoken atmosphere, isn't it, where both people are feeling things but neither person can name the structure.
Yeah, and I find it horrendously difficult to have confronting conversations with one person who's talked to me about confronting someone who is a very difficult character to confront, and I really respect him for doing that. Really given me some confidence to come on. Let's just, and after he confronted, the relationship changed, and he spoke in very positive terms after that moment, where that person actually experienced growth. Both of them did. One of the people then was able to understand what he does in social environments that is damaging, and there's some deep conversations that needed to happen that wouldn't have happened if someone did not get in there with a responsibility to collapse the wave function. You can't move on. Creation cannot happen. Development can't happen without these moments of collapsing of the wave function.
Yeah, wow. So the collapse of the wave brings birth. Sorry, birth? Yeah, I mean, it does. Actually, that's a good Freudian slip, actually. The collapse of the wave can bring birth. That's really cool.
Yeah, the potential of that baby becomes a reality that you hear crying every night for the next week.
And lose your sleep on, yeah. Wow, that's a really deep Freudian slip there. Freudian slip, I don't know whether that's the right term for that.
Don't know. But yeah, that's really important. What were we going to say anyway?
Well, what I was going to say is the collapse of the wave function brings both, not birth, both loss and freedom.
Yeah, and that's really important too. For the person who hoped the wave might become something romantic, naming it can be painful because in a way it collapses the fantasy, and in a way I experience in music, like it's so much better to have a song resonating in your head on a long walk than then you try and put lyrics to it and you try and stick a microphone and record it and it doesn't sound like it did in your head, the fantasy's collapsed. But yeah, as long as it's unspoken, as long as it's a wave, it still has this endless potential. But when it's named, the fantasy has to meet reality, and that is often painful. But it's also freedom, because reality is where we actually live.
Fantasy gives possibility, but reality grounds you. It gives ground.
Exactly. In the beginning, God created Shemaim, the heavens, and the earth, ha'eretz. And the eretz was without form and void. And it's the eretz that God goes to work on. It's the landing of reality that God then develops. And I think we need to take that as a pattern in our lives. And I think that's why these transition moments in relationships and communities are actually so terrifying. But that's also the very reason why I think they are so necessary. The unspoken, it has a kind of power because it remains unresolved. And it's this expanding power. It fills the room. It becomes atmosphere. And eventually it's going to become pressure that needs to be released. But once it's spoken, it becomes located. It's something that we can actually respond to. And in a way, that's where Malchut, which is the idea, it's the bottom of the Sephirot, where actually the heavenlies, the endless possibilities of Ein Sof at the top of the Kabbalistic tree of life, which, apologies for going right into this, but we might as well dive in. The tree of life, Google it in Kabbalistic terms, it's a kind of diagram. It's this endless possibilities that then flows down into Malchut, which is kingdom, which really represents our grounded life here on earth. God's not really interested in his mind being endlessly out there. He wants to ground himself in physicality. He wants to become matter. He wants to become relational communication between people. That's where he wants to flow. That's what life's about, That's the breath. That's the living reality of God in our communities, in our life, in our grounded life.
Wow.
So that's where what I would say sovereignty returns. You're no longer just being moved around by a field you can't see. You can choose. You can bless. You can restrain. You can bring clarification.
It's almost like a holy disruption, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's what God does in our lives all the time. He brings these holy disruptions, and I think that's what we see in the book of Numbers. We talked about it in the last conversation. Israel got to the point where they needed some holy disruption of the wilderness to really help them to be able to name something that I don't think they had the ability to see about themselves. about where they were.
And strangely, even when it's painful, as you've experienced the freedom, that kind of sense of flow of freedom, I can also probably describe that as peace. When I've experienced stuff like that, freedom brings peace that almost passes understanding. And that's ironic, isn't it, that scripture comes out there? Because certainty held well is often more freeing than endless possibility. And we're going to break there, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more about a Kabbalistic concept that's going to also help us unpack this.